All right. Recording in progress. So for the second part, let's put what we worked out in the first half to use with the exterior scene. And what I'm going to do is set my project, Zen Garden. So there is the wine label that we did. And there's the texture that I put on in lecture 8. And what we're going to do is use this as a basis for putting on some graffiti on the table. So let's do, well, let's just render this where it is from here in the perspective camera. All right, so we got plenty of room to put our logo on there. Plenty of room here. If you're doing it at night, it's going to be a little tighter because you got candles. There's still plenty of room to put it somewhere. All right, let's go back here. Okay. All right, so we've already got a texture applied to the table. So what happens if you are in the middle of working on something and your boss comes in and goes, oh, we need to put a layer on that because the customer has a graffiti they want to put on, or they have a sticker they want to put on. Okay, well, that's exactly why we do this demo for you. So let's take a look at the network. There's my texture for the table. There's my place 2D. So normally, if I know I'm going to be layering stuff, I will start off with a layer texture. But since I've already got the network done, I really just don't want to replace my table that I've got done here. I'm going to kind of do it in the hypershade this way. All I have to do is make sure I make the right connections, and then I won't lose anything. So first off, where does the layer texture reside? Anybody remember? Say again? Well, base color, but where do I get it from? Well, the layer texture. Say again? Yeah, so we have to go to other textures, which if you go over to the create section here in the hypershade, you'll see there's your 2D, there's your 3D, there's your environment, there's other. So if I click on that, that will give me a disconnected layer texture. Now, it's real easy to make the connections. So the first thing I want to do is put this into here. And right now, I've only got one input in there. Input 0, and don't forget, Maya uses coding as its basis. 0 is always the first number in coding, and any other number subsequently is sequential. So what we want to do is I want to take the out color from my file node, and I want to plug that into input 0 in the color channel here. All right, so if I click on this, that'll give me the layer texture, but my layer texture is not plugged into the material. This is another important feature. You need to make sure you take the out color of your layer texture and plug that into the base. And all we did was route our texture through the layer texture to get to the material. And now we can add as many layers as we want on top of it. If I render this out, it should appear as though nothing has changed. If you've done that, you're successful. Does that make sense? Questions? All right, Jonathan got it. Other textures. Anybody have questions? Amber's good. Russell's good. Jonathan's good. Okay. So now we can afford to add in another text or another layer. So we need to select the layer texture, go into the attributes. The easiest way to create a new layer is to simply click anywhere in this big blank open space. So by default, when you create a new layer, it's always going to stick it at the bottom of the stack. For our decal, that needs to be in which position? It needs to be on the top. So how do I move it? Yeah, middle mouse, move it. If you try and left click, it's going to select it, but that's about it. You're not going to be able to do anything else. So middle mouse, drag it to the left. You could also middle mouse the top layer, drag it to the right. It doesn't matter what you do. Put them in, order them any way you want. So now we've got it in the second position. So this brand new top layer, this is going to be where we map our projection into. So somebody walk me through assigning a projection to this layer. First thing you want to do, I'll give you that, is select it. Make sure you're in the correct layer. There's nothing worse than accidentally selecting the wrong layer and messing stuff up. That's why there's the Z key. So I've got my layer selected. Now what do I do? All right, so color, click the checker input box. Thank you. That brings up my create render node. Now I stare at it and start to sweat. What do I do? Yeah, remember, we've already got a layer texture. If we go to other textures, we're going to be creating a layer texture, which theoretically you could put a layer texture in a layer texture, but that would be kind of weird. So we want to go 2D textures, right click on file and create as projection. So that's going to give us this little network down here. This is our top layer. Let's kind of move this around to the bottom just to move it out of the way. So here's our top layer. All right, in file, this is where you want to map your decal, sticker, whatever it happens to be. So let's go file, image name, and let's map in our SAL logo. Now, you don't have to use the SAL logo. You can make your initials. You could make some graffiti as long as it is appropriate for all audiences. No hate, no porn, no... I hate that I even have to say all that, but it does happen. So just make sure it's something that is appropriate for all audiences. All right, so we'll use the SAL logo. Open. That adds it in. Now, it looks like we've lost our wood grain, but it's still there. It is basically being hidden by our projection. So there's our projector. It always winds up at the center of the world. Anytime you create anything new in Maya, center of the world. So this we pull out of the ground. How do we know we got the right thing? It's got the diamond in the corner that tells you it's not an area light. Although it does share a lot of attributes with an area light, like that little pointer, so you know which direction to aim it. So let's bring it in. Let's put it above our table and aim it down. So looks like it's 90 degrees negative. There we go. If I want to stick it, and I'm not going to run it between boards because it looks kind of ridiculous. So let's scale it down. So you'll notice as I scale it down, we get more and more copies. That's because we are making them fit into this space on the surface. So notice it doesn't matter how far away my projector is from the source. It's going to project it as though the distance doesn't matter. I kind of like to have it within the working area here so I can kind of adjust it. As I'm working, a lot of times I will try to adjust it inside my camera. But for now, let's just move it. And this is the one I'm interested in, the one that is right under my projector. So let's scale it in a little bit more. Notice if you run it off the sides, it looks like the ink has run or the paint. Scale down a little more. And you can always come in here and scale it, but I'd rather do it by eye in the viewport. All right, so we've got our graffiti in there. So how do we get rid of the extra copies? That's the first thing you want to take care of. Anybody? Okay, where do I find that at? Okay, in the file. So here's my file. All right, Jonathan also said turn off the UV wrap. Where do I find that, Jonathan? So I'm not seeing it here in the file node. Ah, place 2D, that one that's attached to the file node. Yeah. Remember, that's got all of your UV transform repeat information for whatever 2D or 3D object you're doing. So place 2D, let's uncheck wrap U, wrap V. So far, so good. Now, you could do this in this next part in any order. Personally, I prefer to get my default color to match my background of my decal. This way, when I go to apply my blend mode, all of it's taken care of at once. But it doesn't matter what order you do it. You could apply the blend mode now and then come back in and fix that. But what is causing this gray area behind our new layer? Well, that's going to come from the actual file node itself. Yep, Jonathan said the default background color, which is down here under color balance. Expand it. Default color, you want that to match this. So let's bring it up to white. Now everything is the same. All that's left for us now is to apply the proper blend mode to this top layer. We want to find a blend mode that gets rid of white and keeps everything else. So which blend mode? Multiply. And like I said, if you accidentally choose add, you'll realize, oh, that's not what I wanted. Multiply. So now when we render this out, it should work. Now, the nice thing about having this, let me reset this. real size. There we go. Anything that we plug into the base color, which is a layer texture, all of our layers are going to get the same weight. So you don't have to worry about something getting blown out in that layer. Or I should say, in this attribute of the material. Because we've already taken care of it when we put the original wood texture in. So now when we render, we get our SAL. Let's kind of zoom in on this area. All right, so now let's make it a little more realistic. Let's assume this has been there for a little while. It's gotten some UV. It's gotten some wear and tear from being rubbed. Some of the ink or paint or marker has bled into the wood itself. So we want to be able to have some of that wood show through our decal. How do we do that? What would you do in Photoshop or in Substance? You'd adjust the opacity of that layer. How do you adjust the opacity of this layer? So Jonathan said, turn down the alpha, right? Make sure you got the layers selected. Let's turn the alpha down. Now you can do the same thing on this same, or I should say in this same layer texture. You could take like a water ring stain or a wine ring stain, put it under the glass. You can do all kinds of little kind of details to this to make it look a little more worn. And that's the beauty of having a projection, because you can target the exact area where you want it. So one of the disadvantages of doing it in Photoshop is, well, for one thing, you got to export your UVs, paint that in Photoshop, bring it back in. You do it in Substance, you've got the objects in there, but suppose somebody moves your wine glass. Well, if you move your wine glass, you bring your stuff back into Maya, all of a sudden you've got, oh, it doesn't line up where it did in Substance because somebody moved the wine glass. Could be from an animation, it could be from another department. So ideally for something like that, or in this occasion, you might want to put the wine ring stain or whatever it is that might be movable in Maya. Put it on a layer, you can move it around. If it's absolutely essential that it gets burned into the UV map, just make sure if you're doing it in Substance, it's locked down. Like all the final details are locked down from every department, animation, texturing, rigging, whatever they're doing, because stuff does accidentally get moved. And it may not look like a big deal, but if you've taken the time to light stuff or you've taken the time to make sure textures line up, that does make a difference. Does that make sense? Questions? Now, the reason we don't use projections with the wine label is because projections and alpha channels don't work together. Maya's projector does not have alpha channel capabilities, and it doesn't really handle it all that well. So you really need to have that laid on as an actual texture. All right, questions? All right, Amber's good. Jonathan, Melina, Russell, Tyler, anybody got questions? Russell's good. AJ, questions? All right. So let's go inside to the interior. All right, so let's see, what have I got here? Let's do that. All right, so I've got my brushed metal anisotropic material on the thermos here. So let's talk about adding in the AAA logo or decal for this. So this is going to be based off of this reference. So we provide you with the logo right here. Now, if you've already done something like this because you need to have a metal object and you chose to do the interior, you've already done it in Substance, and you can do a projection on the wall. You could do a projection on the table itself too, just like we did with the exterior. But let's talk a little bit about doing this in metal. So here's our metal material. 0.598 is our value. So if I plug my projection into the base color, I'm going to lose my metal background. So what I need to have is I need a layer texture in my base color. That base color value needs to be gray, and it needs to be a value of 0.598. All right, so what I'm going to do is let's go into the hypershade. And let's go thermos brushed metal. Here we go. So this is all a material so far. So the first thing I need to do is plug in a layer texture here. Why? Because I need to have the base metal background so I can put that black logo or decal on top of it, just like in my reference. There's my reference. So let's just kind of move that over to the side. All right, I've already figured out this has got to be gray. It's got to be 0.598. So let's plug in a layer texture. layer texture, under other textures. By default, it's going to give me that disgusting green color. What I need to do is make that, and this has got to be 0.598. So now if I render this out, I shouldn't see any change. I don't. Good. But I've got a layered texture now, so I need to put my decal on top of this layer. What's the first step? So I've already given you the layer texture. What do we do from here? Yeah, we need to make a new layer. All right, now, where does that layer need to be in the order? Yep, so it needs to be on top. So let's move it to the left. Now, if I render this out, it's going to look like green metal, but that's all right. So this is our decal label. Where do we go from here? Well, here's hypershade. Yep. So what we need to do is we select the layer in the color part of that layer. This is where we're going to map in a file node. So what do I do here? What's that? Click File. Okay, wait, that didn't give me a projection. Ah, right-click File. So let's select that. Let's do that one more time. Right-click File. Ah, there we go. Create as projection. Now I got my little network there. In File, this is where I want to plug in my decal, my logo, my sticker, whatever it happens to be. So here's our AAA logo. Let's click OK or Open. It's there, but we're not going to see it because it is all the way at the center of the world over here. Now, what I need to do is move this so it is in front of my label, my bottle. Now, I could translate it, rotate it, scale it, do all that stuff. Or there is a handy little feature inside the Place 3D. And remember, the Place 3D is what gives the projector its 3D mobility, X, Y, and Z. There's a handy feature in there called Fit to Group B-Box. B-Box stands for a bounding box. You guys remember that from modeling? You can define any shape of any object in 8 points. It creates a box that describes the volume that that object takes up. Very simple, very easy. Now, all you need to do, if this works, is simply click Fit to Group B box, and it didn't work. What it should do is take this shape, make it the size of the thermos, and snap it to it. This worked last month, so if anybody wants to see it work, it works last month. When it does this to me, I just Z back, and I just translate it over manually. I have no idea what the magic formula is, why it does that, but it works half the time. The only reason I show that is out of the sheerest optimism that will work. And Maya never fails to crush my dreams. So let's just scale it, rotate it, move it around. Now, could hit Fit to B box, and of course, there it goes. It's stupid. All right, now, I've got it kind of roughed in. I really have no idea where it is, what it's doing. If I hit 5, hit 6, I'm not going to see it. Why? Because it's metal. You're not going to be able to see metal in the viewport because Maya can't. It can't display metal or glass. So let's render that out. You'll see there is a couple of big giant logos there. So first off, just like any other projection, we've got multiple decals. We need to get rid of them. So how do we get rid of them? Close, very close. Unwrap U and unwrap V, but where do I find that at? Place 2D of the place 2D that's attached to the file, just in case there are multiple place 2Ds in your network. So there's my file node, place 2D. This is where I want to uncheck wrap U, wrap V. If I render this again, I've only got one version. But notice I've got a really light spot here and a really dark spot over here. That is coming from the fact that my logo is white and everywhere else that the logo does not cover, we've got the default color of 50% gray. So we want to have our default color in the file node of a projection to match the background of our decal. And that means we have to change it to white. But now it's very bright, too bright, much brighter than the brushed metal. So we have one more thing left to do. We're not really seeing the background right now. So we need to see the background so that this is not too bright. What do we need to do? Yeah, we need to change the blend mode from none, which means this is just covering up everything underneath, to multiply. So now when we do that, we get the correct value of our thermos. And now we can spend some time kind of getting this logo scaled and positioned midway. All right, so let's see. Let's take this, let's scale it in a little. And actually, probably one of the better tools for this would be using the interactive placement, because this allows us, almost like interactive placement in UVs, this allows me to scale it. And I can also translate it. All I have to do is click in this lower left corner and translate, and let's drop it down a little. Now, it looks like it's a little bit stretched vertically, so let's scale that. Let's do this. Let's just scale this a little bit. There we go. That's much better. Now, if you're not happy with the placement, let me click this little corner here. And we can always move it a little bit. We can always rotate it. Too much. Let's rotate it back. All right, does that make sense? Questions? So you can do this to metal, you can do it to any object you've got. Let's see. All right. Questions? Anybody got questions in Zoom? So make sure you go to the file of the texture. And then it's the place 2D. You want to uncheck wrap U and wrap V. Did you find it? So if you're going to do the same thing to the wall, you need a layered texture on the wall. You can put a projection there. You can put graffiti there. You can put marker on the table. You could move, scuff and wear that up also. Put a couple water ring stains under the mug. All right, so one thing more I want to show you is what happens if you bring a texture in from the internet and it's too saturated. A lot of times this will happen if you get something with reds, greens, or blues that are really close to the base red, green, and blue colors. What happens is they will tend to oversaturate because they are close to those base colors. And especially with the file compression, decompression, every time you work on a JPEG or a PNG, that artifacting tends to enhance all the saturation. So let me assign a new material to our chair at the desk. All right, so on that chair, let's bring in one of my favorite oversaturated textures, and that is a red checker or plaid texture that looks like it belongs on a tablecloth. All right, so let's see, where's this at? Tablecloth, there we go, yeah. Nice and saturated. This should not look that new. It's near a window, it's going to get a lot of UV, it's going to get a lot of light, it's going to get some wear and tear and fading and maybe even yellowing. But let's see what we can do here as far as desaturating that color. All right, let's see what this looks like when we render it. All right, so I just threw a default Arnold material on there. Honestly, it's got default specular. It's probably not going to have that. If it's really cloth and it's cotton, like a lot of these are, you'll also notice that it is getting blasted with total sunlight, which really needs to be adjusted. So let's knock the diffuse or the base weight down a little. All right, that's a little better. Still bright, but not blown out bright. But that red is super saturated. So what could I do? Well, I could go into Photoshop. I could throw an adjustment layer on it, make it a PSD, adjust it, not export it, but save it out as a targa, bring it back into Maya. It's too much, it's too little. A lot of times you're never right on the money the first time. It's a lot easier if you use one of Maya's utilities called a remap HSV. HSV stands for hue, saturation, and value. So let's get the chair graphed, desk chair. And And we're going to go under utility. So in the hypershade, under create, Maya, utilities. Utilities, remember, are alphabetical, gamma correct, sampler info. This is under R for remap. Go down under remap, and you don't want color, you don't want value, you don't want RGB to HSV, you want remap HSV. Very simple. It's got an input and an output. What you do is you take your file node, out color to the input color on the left of the remap, take the remap out color, plug that into your base color. By default, nothing's going to change. But if I select the remap now, notice I get in the attributes, I get hue, I get saturation, I get value, and I get sort of a little curve thing that I can manipulate. What we're interested in doing is under value, you want to select the top right point of the curve. And if you drag it down, well, that's value. I don't want value. I want saturation, because if I do value, yeah, it's going to make it darker, but I don't want that. I want saturation. So I take the top right point of saturation, and if I drop it down, it starts to desaturate it. If I take it all the way to 0, it basically turns off the color. Now, what I want to do is just desaturate it a little. Let's try like let's try 0.9. So now if I render this again, notice it has knocked back some of that really, really vibrant red. Too much? Dial it back up. Now that you've got the selected value, you can always go, well, let's go 0.95 instead of 0.9. Maybe it was too much. Not enough? I take it down to like maybe 0.85. We're just trying to find that sweet spot where it looks natural, especially if you're trying to match your reference, and it looks like it belongs in the environment. Yeah, honestly, that's probably a bit much. So this is the default saturation that you get with the texture. This is after I've adjusted the saturation value, that top right part of the graph, drop it down to, well, I dropped in this case to 0.9. All right, does that make sense? Questions? So this can be your friend with textures where you don't have to go back into Photoshop or go back into Substance and desaturate stuff. Now, one of the dirty little secrets of this is that you can actually change the hue. The hue changes just like it does in the hue section of the color picker. You've got that slider that goes from 0 up to 1 or 0 to 360, depending on what you have. And it goes from red, it goes orange, it goes yellow, it goes green, blue, indigo, violet, back to red. So technically, you can change the colors simply by dragging the upper right portion of the hue and changing it. Now, ideally, if you're going to do this and it's going to be permanent, you probably want to do it in Photoshop. But this is good proof of concept if you're working with a client and they go, oh, yeah, we really like that. I know we gave you red, but what would it look like as blue? Well, what kind of blue do you want? How about that? Now it's got to be more towards green. All right, yeah, we'll go more towards like a cyanish color. Like I said, it's probably not going to be something you want to do permanently, but like it's good proof of concept. Now, fortunately, this is only two colors. It's white and it's got a hue in the checker. So it works pretty good for replacement. We've got a main color. But like I said, if you leave that hue at the very top, that'll be the position that the color is in that texture. All right, questions? So it's called Remap HSV. And again, it gets connected. The output of your file node gets connected to the input on the right side of it. Then you take the output or out color of your remap and plug that into your base color. It's that simple. You're just running your file nodes through that remap into your attribute. And you can always add some value in if you need to. All right, so I think we covered pretty much everything that I had. You guys have any questions? Anything not clear? All right. We're going to treat the rest of the time like a lab. So work. If you have questions, you need help with something, let me know. And then we'll go to dinner at 5 o'clock and come back to lab at 6. All right, so let me set my screen up here. All right, I'm going to stop the video and